Now, my interest in the subject stems from boyhood. I picked this poster up at a very wet reenactment at Basing House sometime in the early 2000s. It's Stephen Beck's depiction of the Battle of Lansdowne. And indeed, he did a series of these stylistic maps that adorn the pages of the works of Brigadier Peter Young, who, of course, laid the groundwork for any future historians studying the 17th century and Civil War period. It's stylistic in nature. It's depicting every single event in the battle happening at once, but it does hark back to contemporary examples such as Streeter's Battle of Naseby map in Anglia-Redivia, and indeed depictions of the Battle of Nordlingen and Lutzen in the Swedish Intelligencer. However, if you have this on your wall and you squint your eyes in the lamplight, you could almost imagine each of the individual characters on the poster actually moving around the landscape. And this is something I think we need to keep in mind when talking about military manuals. Although they are stylistic in nature, the artist is having some fun with pretty dry subject matter. There is a lot of movement imparted in the figures represented within these books and documents. And of course, there is Streeter's map of Naseby as well. And I'm including military manuals and military mapping within the study of military manuals purely because if we look at the map in a granular detail, we can notice that although it remains stylistic in detail, the artist is aware of tactical formations and movements on the battlefield in reality. So it can be put into the same stable as the military manual as well. Now, what exactly is a military manual? They first come about in a formal sense around about 1593 under Maurice of Nassau, who wanted systematic choreography of different troop types within the Dutch army within a particular tactical arrangement. Now, this synchronized mass drill overrided the relative limitations posed by contemporary weapon systems. So we've got to remember that muskets of the time were smoothbore, relatively inaccurate, over 50 yards. However, you combine it with you combine the shot together, quantity has a quality all of its own. You start to create casualties in the opposing enemy. But equally, the bayonet is quite a way off. There's no way for the muskets to actively defend themselves without some trouble. But combine them with the defensive pike, you have a system that starts to work. Equally, pikemen at this point, very good defensively, although they are used in an offensive capacity early on during the civil wars. This largely falls away purely because it's a one-trick pony. However, if you combine defensive pike with offensive musket, it creates a universal system for which regiments can be used in the field. However, with no localized national conflict or military academies, forget your West Points or Sandhursts, it was felt the best way to diffuse this military strategy and planning was through books and manuals such as William Barry's military discipline of the young artilleryman, possibly the most widespread use of a military treatise within the English-speaking world. It went to about 7 editions between 1635 and 1681. And in this manual, drill is broken down step by step through pictorial, schematic, and written sources to present the correct handling and management of an army on campaign. So here we see a unit of shot deploying from column of march into a firing line on the battlefield. And these kind of books were diffused by the likes of not just militias, but trained bands, honourable artillery companies, and they were written not only by veterans with experience of campaigning on the continent, but also by enthusiastic, if unskilled members of the upper middle classes as well. And this creates a big problem as we get into the British Civil Wars, in that lots of lots of drill that seems good in theory simply is not applicable on the field. And indeed, I argue that something like the self-denying ordinance that gets introduced in early 1645 is a direct way of separating the amateur, if enthusiastic, officer from the professional. So military manuals are a sign of growing professionalism within standing armies. On some occasions, we do get state-sanctioned systematic drill. And what often happens is that one country will get it, other countries will see how practical it is and take it and adapt it for their own use. And this is certainly the case with the numerous iterations we see of the Dutchman Jacob de Gen's weapon handling, as seen here. Now, in Britain in 1640, it was believed that only 4 men could fire a mortar gun in the whole country. Yet the spate of military manuals available of varying quality, and the duty of any middle to upper class gentleman to be informed with the latest military tradition, the officer class was far from elite, something we need to keep very clearly in mind. However, to point out the importance of the military manual, Derby Museum does have a copy of Thomas Steibert's The Pathway to Martial Discipline, and it stains with its owner's blood. It was owned by Sir John Gale, the parliamentarian commander at the Battle of Hopton Heath in 1643. He had it in his pocket, which just institutes and clarifies the real-world use of such books. It's not just for officers' training, it can be used in reality as well. However, we must remember when looking at pictorial evidence for the running of a military unit that what is presented is an ideal, and occasionally, such as Henry Hexham or Gervase Markham's The Will, this requires 5,000 men to pivot on the spot, as seen here, as if on a parade ground. That such drill is simply not workable. It has too many working parts. It's ridiculous. Military innovation often means that such rules were rarely adhered to. Now, remember that the point of drill is that the soldier in the heat of battle can hark back to well-learned drill. Now, the parachute regiment about 20 years ago did a study that came to the conclusion that over 100 beats per minute, rational thought is simply not possible. Manuals used also include John Crusoe's military instructions for the cavalry. The tactics of Alien are often drill manuals, hark back to classical and archaic text, such as the likes of Thucydides and Caesar, Robert Ward's Animadversions of War, and George Monk's observations on military affairs. And when looking at these battlefields, we need to break them down into three distinct deployment models. The first is instituted by Maurice of Nassau from 1593, and it's the basic Dutch regimental deployment, with infantry in the centre, cavalry, sleeves of cavalry on the flanks. The infantry centre, the pike would form a composite centre and would be flanked by sleeves of musket. And this would be in a checkerboard fashion with a block of pike, with a block of musket, and so on and so forth down the line. Positions of honour would be placed in the vanguard of an army, and this is usually on the right of the line, due to the necessity of deploying an army from order of march to order of battle. So by this very nature, we can generalize, we can possibly say that more experienced troops are going to be on the right of a battlefield area, and thus this should be represented within the artifactual remains they've left behind. This system was based around the Roman triarii system of 3 lines acting in sync. The last 2 lines within a battle line would act in reserve to fill holes within the depleted front ranks of a formation, and they would be staggered across gaps in that formation. This again will be represented through a checkerboard profile with the alignment of differing lines staggered to feed troops into any rising tactical situation. Now, firing was carried out by something called the salve or the caracole. The front rank would fire for retiring to the rear to reload, thus allowing rear ranks to advance. That was the caracol. The salve, on the other hand, was combining your musket shot together and firing one massed volley from all ranks within that front line. Thus, archaeologically, this should be represented at high frequency through alternating blocks of high-density musket ball scatters with areas of little ordnance-based evidence. This would be represented within your metal detector survey on a vertical alignment. These scatters should represent parallel, roughly linear associations of multiples of 6, representing the contemporary depths within these units. Middle point between the two forces should be represented through evidence of broken strap ends, broken weaponry, detritus not necessarily associated with a battlefield assemblage, but would be largely devoid within our generalization of ordnance-based evidence. And this represents both sides engaging in hand-to-hand combat and push-a-pike. Flanking cavalry action would be represented by small-scale linear representations of small caliber pistol and carbine shots, with a mixed assemblage side with no association. This represents firearms used during the melee of two bodies of horse. It's also possible that we can undertake small-scale soil analysis within the localized area to understand levels of compaction within a small-scale soil horizon to understand large-scale trampling as bodies of cavalry move across this ground sequentially during the course of a battle. However, this system might be complicated through the adoption of Gustav Adolf's Swedish deployment model, which revolves around the demihertz. So these musket would advance and connect to form a firing line. They're volley fired. They again disconnected, allowing the pike to advance. Swedish formations, as opposed to Dutch formations, which are reliant upon equal footings of defensive pike and musket, Swedish formations, their emphasis is on imparting the maximum amount of firepower against their targets. And this would be represented again through largely linear, large-scale musket ball assemblages, again on a vertical plane within your metal detector survey, and again interspersed with large gaps representing the units advance onto the field. Swedish style deployments took this arrowhead formation, and the block of pike would form a composite center with the composite bodies of musket on either side of them, flanking them. There would also be a reserve of shots behind the pike, thus creating a composite formation to which they consisted. Again, this would be represented at an archaeological level through large-scale musket ball assemblages being situated on the peripheries of the field, the center dominated by merely broken weaponry, representing pike blocks engaging against each other. However, within Britain and Germany, with the conclusion of the 30 Years' War on the continent and the beginnings of the British Civil Wars, officers found these formation styles simply too static, too complicated to be applied on a battlefield situation, and thus adapt the two systems together. Thus, we have composite Swedish formations organized on a brigade and a tertiary level using the alternating Dutch method. So you would have Swedish formations next to each other in a Dutch checkerboard fashion. Again, this will be represented by linear bands of musket ball assemblages, but on a horizontal and a vertical plane within your metal detector survey, almost like a grid system. And again, there will be large gaps between representing engagement in hand-to-hand fighting. Using associated orders of battle and applying this to manual rules for unit spacing and creating generalizations taken from examination of the consistency of the assemblage, what we're presented with is a correlation with the position of the Finnish cavalry wing interspersed with commander shot over an area of about 2,000 meters. Opposition was presented in the form of 4 units of Croat cavalry. We can see on the left-hand side of the screen across a 113-meter area. And this is positioned between the Flögraben and Via Regia rivers. They advanced in the battle about 500 meters from the imperialist line. But the historical record tells us that during this action, light cavalry were forced back before meeting a stalemate as the Swedes retreated in the wake of Gustav Adolf's death. This is highlighted by isolated assemblages at 150-meter intervals, although somewhat lost by compounded individual actions overplaying these assemblages throughout the course of the battle. So fighting over the same areas of ground consistently during the battle. Thus, 25 to 75 balls per hectare actually equals quite heavy fighting. Now, to break down individual actions, we need to lower the frequency of a metal detector survey. Most metal detector surveys are undertaken at a scale of about 1 to 20. It needs to be reduced really down to 1 to 10 in order to gain a full artifact yield from that area of ground being studied. Within this, we need to be looking for similar ball morphology, and what this represents is standardized weapon systems creating similar ballistics to each other for a particular individual that can be identified, and looking for the repeat use of this particular set of characteristics across a battlefield area. We can assign individuals and how they're moving as part of a unit that can then be linked to understanding of known battle chronology and orders of battle. Now, characteristically, a unit of shot will be represented with a 180-degree sphere of influence, about 50 to 100 meters in front of their firing position. Remember, where bullets fall doesn't necessarily mean where the projectiles were actually fired from. Now, a unit in melee will be represented by a more varied and less organized artifact frequency. Now, within our survey, initially it was quite clear that too high a frequency of carbine shot was represented within these assemblages, suggesting a distinct lack of Croat cavalry, and with no link to the historical record, suggesting a possible previously unrecorded withdrawal, meaning they're not represented clearly within these artifact assemblages. The left-hand assemblage, we can see at the bottom of the screen, represents a mixed unit action due to the presence of within it of, rather than bullets, actually represented 76% gun furniture, suggesting cavalry charges versus infantry positions. So things like cut, musket trigger loops. That's what's being represented within the assemblage. Within this, 14 musket balls per hectare suggests a strung out linear formation opposed by an east to west column of orientation of cavalry equipment. Dips and growths within this density represent flashpoints within the engagement. Now, comparing unit numbers for the established order of battle for this area of the battlefield and using drill book rules for unit frontages, so each person is taking up about 3 foot by 6 foot of area, we can come to the conclusion that this area represents a stand by Bagot's infantry regiment, which would fit exactly into this assemblage over about a 45-meter area. The right-hand assemblage that we can see at the top of the screen has a lower density of about 3.2 balls per hectare, and this suggests a rearguard action over about 185-meter area. But distribution is too low to attribute clear troop identification. We now go on to our second case study of the Battle of Edge Hill, the first major engagement of the First Civil War, fought on the 23rd of October, 1642. Just like we saw at the beginning with different models of deployment, we can do exactly the same here on the Edge Hill battlefield, with 3 centres of influence, 2 sleeves of cavalry with an infantry centre. Now, de Gond's map within his papers in Oxford for the Royalist deployment has the main Royalist position on the Edge Hill scarp that we can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the map, with both flanks anchored on the hedges, thus enclosing the space available for deployment, backed up by written accounts. So thus, we have an area, a survey area of about 2,000 feet, although it is possible that the survey area actually extends out this area due to the fact that we are compensating for shortfall in units and unreliable orders of battle. So the orders of battle for Edgehill may well be representing every single unit on the field without accounting for some units consisting of 1,200 men, other units consisting of 10 men. Now, represented with map regression, taking our map back to how it would have appeared in the 17th century, identified landmarks contemporary with the battle within our modern landscape sit astride heavily enclosed landscapes, thus denying effective deployment. Thus, we have very, very squidged up formations represented. Now, this has been taken from Pannett's landscape survey from the 1970s, incorporating Baton's 1726 map for the Edgehill battlefield. And what it does is it inclines Parliament's line on a north-south tangent, placing both lines within 1,000 yards of each other, accounting for the weapon's short range, low rates of fire, and inaccuracy, as well as initial hesitation at engaging either force. So rather than representing strategic doctrine, it shows rather a human aspect to our battlefield. Both sides are unwilling to be the first to fire the first shots of the war. However, our calculated frontages do not fit well within the area selected. The flanks are forced forward, so the cavalry is placed on a steep incline knoll to which they'll bear no strategic role, no tactical role on the way the battle will play out. However, this shortfall has been accounted for little account of the topographic layout of the battlefield within the written accounts. If we find the further accounts moving forward, it might present a less enclosed nature to the battlefield, which would explain the discrepancies being presented within our data set. Now, looking at our metal detector survey, what we can clearly discern is a clear difference between Parliamentarian 28 bore and Royalist 12 bore shot, suggesting the proliferation of older weapons by both armies of differing calibers at the beginning of the war in order to get as many soldiers into the fighting as possible. However, it's often difficult to differentiate between carbine and musket balls, and this means that it's very difficult to highlight individual actions within our metal detector survey. Although it is possible that at the top left of the accumulation, we do have representation for the Parliamentarian baggage guard. It would certainly fit in from why it's so far away from the main assemblage. Equally, the high proportion of slug bullets also represented on peripheries of what we can only assume are pike gaps within the main assemblage suggests their common use against armoured troops for their stopping and expansive power. This breaks from manual tradition. Bullets is basically a hammered out musket ball bullet, acts just the same way as a modern dum-dum bullet. However, the low frequency of survey merely reveals character and intensity of fighting rather than revealing individual units and troop movements. It's just a data set. We can't really pull any individual actions out of this. However, distinct gaps either side of the central accumulation possibly suggest the presence of cavalry, although localized enclosure represents the extent of this unit, and where localized around hedgerows, it suggests quite possibly integration of dragoons. That will be equally represented by the presence of smaller caliber balls. However, lack of musket balls within these areas suggests the accuracy of the written account. Most accounts make it very, very clear that Prince Rupert broke from manual tradition and charged in with the sword, using the momentum to break any opposing units, compared with Parliamentarians' reliance on the caracol, Swedish caracol system, firing just as they're closing with the enemy, meaning they have no momentum behind them. And this is quite clearly suggested by a possible accumulation to the southwest. However, what we are presented with is a definitive east-northeast linear grouping suggesting orientation for the main battle lines, agreeing with the historical record. Equally to the east, we see the first grouping of parallel accumulations representing initial clashes of both forces on a northwest-southeast orientation. The clear gap between, though, can be discerned as possible highlighted area for evidence of pusher pike and hand-to-hand fighting. However, due to the damage done as a result of Kyneton MOD depot, it means that this area needs to be further analysed to account for this. Density of the artifact accumulations, though, coupled with the high level of spherical rather than deformed shot, suggests initial shots fired at about 300-yard range, deformation occurring at about 100 yards. And this is suggested by most manuals and written accounts of the time. Evidence of Royalist caliber shot starting at 500 to 250 meter range equally suggests an advance through salvi, so a rolling advance. The levels of density, though, do agree with military science of the time. Thus, we can combine the metal detector survey with our refined deployment model, and what it clearly shows is a clear test, a clear challenge between Dutch and Swedish tactics, but the metal detector survey fits perfectly within our regress landscape. Manuals also diffuse rudimentary fortress building and engineering, whether it be the works of Barry, Bernard de Gon, Charles I's chief engineering officer, or indeed Papillon of Gloucester, who was parliamentarian. Geometry on chance and classical thinking were learnt and spread through such means. Comparative models can be established for town defences, dependent on individual style established by their chief engineer who planned them. So sites quite clearly established include Oxford, Leicester, and Carmarthen. Now, this is important as the Committee of Safety, following the Civil War, systematically cited all fortifications providing for those unhoused. Therefore, apart from a very few exceptions, there are very few complete 17th century earthworks left remaining. But evidence of absence doesn't necessarily mean absence of evidence. Urban town planning often incorporates established enchant and linear enclosure for modern alignment of modern housing. Turn to the defense of landscape ghost by combining localized housing surveys coupled with angles off of suburban streets with associations to previous defensive landscapes, earthworks can be traced. And this has particularly been done at sites such as Basing House with metal detector and landscape survey, confirming defences extended onto Basingstoke Common. It's certainly been done at Newark and at Carmarthen Bulwarks in West Wales, which I headed an unsuccessful attempt to have them properly preserved in 2018. Of course, the most famous example is, of course, Hyde Park and the back of Buckingham Palace, which did also form the outer limits of London's defences. Even in Alton, this is visible. For many years, historians have questioned what form the town's defences took between 1643 and 44. However, the 1666 map shows the precinct surrounding St Lawrence's Church was looking distinctly like Cornwall, as we can see right here. I believe the slope to the rear of Alton Church, leading down towards Alton's Library, is the only surviving element remaining of Alton's defences. This is the King's Knot in Stirling. It's a show garden created for Charles I for his progress in Scotland in 1620. However, by the 1640s, it was a derelict garden. However, Deer Park, which sits just adjacent to the knot, was the site of the Battle of Stirling in 1648. Part of the engagement, it directly led to the execution of the king in January of 1649. Now, after the fighting, a stalemate existed between the Covenanter garrison of Stirling Castle, between the Covenanter garrison of Stirling Town, and the engagers outside of the town as well. And naturally, you don't want these groups mixing together in billets in Stirling Town. You need somewhere, a marching camp, say, to sleep for 8 weeks. Now, the engagers consist of about 10,000 men, and I make the argument that the knot was reincorporated as a siege camp. There has been limited finds of musket balls on the right edges of the garden, but it is well drained. And if you use Barry's rules for camp formation area, for 10,000 men that not meets the area needed absolutely perfect. And as you can see right here, there's a central mound to it as well. You can mount guns on it, perfect elevation on the castle, and indeed it is so close to the base of the castle rock that guns from the castle can't necessarily elevate onto the position either. So in conclusion, through integration with programs like GIS or available map and metal detector and landscape regression, and creating presumed distribution and extent of battle lines, combining all this information together according to written accounts, we can create developmental movement, extent of unit movement within a battlefield landscape, according to rules created on military practice of the time. And this should allow us to improve the boundary rationale for historic battlefields moving forward.